What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and one of my little guilty pleasures here, right? Best kept secrets when it comes to DC Comics is the Earth 3 Crime Syndicate limited series, right? It's only 6 issues long, and in fact, it just finished. But in the back of each of these issues are basically the origins of the different members of the Crime Syndicate, right? Ultraman, Superwoman, all those kind of characters. And this one is Emerald Knight. But here's a funny thing about this, is that if you guys are familiar with the Crime Syndicate, you guys know the Green Lantern is actually Hal Jordan. Instead, this starts off with Jon Stewart, which really begs the question, how is it that the Green Lantern ring, the Emerald Knight ring as it's called, goes from Jon Stewart to Hal Jordan? And I'm sure we'll find that out over the course of the series. But the cool thing about this is that with Jon Stewart himself, as most of you guys know, he's the kind of law and order guy, right? Jon Stewart's not the guy to get involved in different crimes or crazy situations or anything like that, right? This guy is former military and he seemingly always kind of does the right thing, except for when he blows up a world, right? Then that definitely wasn't the right thing to do. But regardless of the situation, Jon Stewart's one of these guys where you want him in your corner. With Earth 3, one of the things to keep in mind for those of you guys who are new to comics, Earth 3 is basically a universe where everything is kind of topsy-turvy. So the good guys are bad guys, the bad guys are good guys. People are largely self-interested and they don't really care about other people. So like a majority of humanity here in the real world, for all you cynics out there. But the story of Jon Stewart's really cool, right? So initially this picks up in Coast City about 5 months before the start of the Crime Syndicate story. And you initially pick up with Jon Stewart, as a cop who's there with his daughter Liza. Now this is also kind of a big change too, is that Jon Stewart as an ex-military guy, usually when you think of like a cop in the Green Lanterns, you think of Guy Gardner, right? You don't really think of Jon Stewart, but it's one of these cool little things. Now in the midst of this, as he's kind of talking to his daughter and she's kind of like, everybody's staring at my crutches and that kind of thing, feeling very, very self-conscious about the surgery she'd gone to, the injuries she'd sustained, different things like that. The reality is Jon Stewart really kind of reminds us of the version that we know from the main DC universe when he tells her, like, here's the thing, right? Things are different now for you. But at the end of the day, remember who you are, right? Don't let other people get to you. At the end of the day, that's really kind of what's going on. Don't let them bother you. Don't let them get to you. Just kind of do your own thing. In the middle of all that, there's a kind of a scuffle across the street. And when one of the guys is like, there's a cop over there, then the person who's doing the scuffling, right? The criminal, we can call him that, looks over and realizes it's Jon Stewart and says, oh, no. Don't worry about him. He owes my dad, right? Like this guy owes my dad money. So, it's not a great, big, huge deal. At that point, Jon Stewart freaks out. Now, because of the fact that this is such a short comic, right? 3 or 4 pages, there isn't really a whole lot given to us in terms of extreme detail, but we can kind of fill in the blanks on our own, right? That one of the things that he talks about here is that when it comes to the bad guys getting a hold of the good guys and getting good guys to do bad things, that it's not usually with like bullets and bombs, right? Sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes it happens when, you have villains, criminals, what have you, who just, show up guns blazing and just kind of spray everything down. But the reality is that in this situation, in Jon's case, it was that he made a mistake. That when his daughter needed surgery, that he didn't have the money to do it on his own. So he basically ended up taking money from what seems to be a crime boss, and that he paid him back, right? He did whatever it is he needed to do, and then he paid the guy back, his debt's clear. But the reality is, as far as, those members of the criminal underworld who are familiar with the situation go, Jon Stewart owes this guy, right? So it's one of these things where he's kind of tainted, right? And it's just going to follow him around, or seems to follow him around forever. Now, unlike Jon Stewart as we know him, where he's a lot more controlled, he's a lot more reserved, that he's very, very methodical, as opposed to being more emotional, like Hal Jordan, right? Quick to fly off the handle in the case of somebody like Kyle Rayner, where he's a lot more confined in that way. Here, he just loses it, right? He immediately starts attacking this guy. And again, that's the nature of Earth 3, that the characters are essentially their opposites, right? As we know them in terms of personality, in terms of their powers, as far as how they get them, the role they play in the superhero landscape. And so he just like literally starts attacking this guy. And it's like, you don't control me, you don't own me, none of that stuff, right? Nobody owns me. But at the end of the day, the biggest issue that he sees himself kind of falling into here is that he's kind of becoming that villain, right? Becoming that version of himself that he simply didn't necessarily want to be. Now, one of the things that's kind of murky about Earth 3, and it's one of the things that DC's kind of waxed and waned on, going all the way back to the pre-crisis days, in the post-crisis landscape, and even during like the New 52, is that the nature in which people end up becoming their villainous or evil selves in Earth 3 changes, right? That if you go and you read the old pre-crisis stuff, they were just naturally that way, right? It's just inherently the way they were. In more recent years, it's been one of those things where it's just kind of like, given the nature of the universe, their personalities naturally gravitate to being that way. So it really kind of shifts and changes based on what era of story you're talking about. But ultimately, his daughter witnesses him losing control and absolutely pummeling this guy. Now, he doesn't beat him to death, right? He just beats the hell out of him, if for anything, then to send a message, when suddenly he's met by the arrival of the Emerald Knight ring. Now, again, in Earth 3, instead of it being called the Green Lantern ring, it's the Emerald Knight ring. And so when Jon Stewart's met by the arrival of this thing, it's not how we normally expect, right? Like, you know, such and such, you have the ability to overcome great fear, welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. Instead, it's Jon Stewart, you will join the ranks of the Emerald Knights, just appears here and says, you're going to join our ranks. And the reason for that is that in the Crime Syndicate landscape and the Earth 3 universe, the way it's given to us, the Green Lanterns seem to be more of like a paramilitary force, right? They're not really a peacekeeping force. They almost fall directly in line with what you would expect the Sinestro Corps to be from the main DC universe. Now, one of the funny things about this is that this is all uncharted waters. We never got the origin of the Green Lanterns themselves in terms of how they came into existence in the Crime Syndicate universe. The closest we got was during Sam Humphrey's Green Lanterns, when you basically ended up learning that Power Ring, which was essentially possessed by a portion of the spirit Volthoom, the first lantern, was basically that spirit of Volthoom from an alternate universe that was basically trying to find a way, traveling through the multiverse, to prevent the destruction of his own universe. He ultimately failed, but along the way he put a portion of his soul inside of a ring, which became the Power Ring from Earth 3. That's the most we ever got, right? So we've never really seen an instance where a person's been bonded to a Green Lantern ring in Earth 3, how the whole process works. You basically just had Hal Jordan, right, who showed up during Forever Evil, and that was it. That's really all you got, which I still feel like we should cover Forever Evil somewhere along the line, because we never covered that story from DC Comics, and there are a lot of great DC stories that we should cover. But the important thing here is that when this ring kind of has a conversation with Jon, which is not really normal, that Jon's just kind of like, no, like get back, right? And this thing's like, I will be your power ring, you will create law and order. And when the response of Jon is, I don't want power, right? I don't want to owe anybody, the response of the ring is, no, you misunderstand. My power is free to use, right? This is an honor. And so it's kind of nuts, because in the midst of that, this guy, right, this son of this mob boss kind of wakes up and says, like, when my father hears about this, he's going to kill you and he's going to kill your daughter. Right now, the reality of this, and you talk to anybody who's a parent, right? If you're a parent who wouldn't beg, borrow, steal, and kill for your kid, you're no measure of a parent at all. And there's no arguing that point. And so in the face of that, the whole idea of Jon Stewart is, then I'll do whatever it takes to protect my child, right? I'll do whatever it takes to protect my daughter, and, you know, kind of protect himself as well. And so ultimately the ring tells him, you have to protect your daughter. This guy's telling you, you're both gonna die if you let him leave. So, like, take my ring, save your daughter, save yourself, kill this guy. And that's exactly what Jon does. Jon kills this guy in order to keep his family safe. Now, the funny thing about this, and what he was talking about with the idea of a slippery slope, and it's something that I've never really agreed on, we'll talk about why here in a second, that ultimately he ends up incinerating this guy. The ring kind of chimes in and says, the world's better off without him, which it is. And then the ring says, there's always more evil, Jon. It simply won't stop. And so ultimately it says, to serve and to protect, isn't that the oath you took? We can do that and more, Jon. Take my power as your own and become the Emerald Knight. And so following that, he becomes like this pretty extreme guy, basically incinerating virtually any evil that he comes across. Now, the reality of this is, I don't really believe in the argument of the slippery slope, because that implies that you have no self-control. It implies that you lack the ability to make intelligent and rational decisions, and that essentially any action you take following that is not really your fault, right? It's just a slippery slope. I mean, you just end up kind of falling down this path. That's nonsense, right? As a human being, you have the ability to decide what you will and will not do. At any given point in time, you can literally stop what you're doing and ask the question, is this logical? Is it reasonable? Is it for the greater good, right? Like, is it legitimately for the greater good? You know, it's not one of these things where like your perception of the world is forever tainted and you will never, ever, ever, ever be able to do a good thing in your life. It's one of those things where like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I never really understood the slippery slope argument. I mean, I'm kind of curious. Let me know down in the comment section if the slippery slope argument is something you guys are in support of. But again, this is just a really short 3 or 4 page origin story, not a whole lot going there. And it just kind of gives us the origin of how it is that the Earth 3 Crime Syndicate version of Jon Stewart ended up becoming the Emerald Knight, right? And there's each one of these has like these little backup features, you know, where you learn about the origins of what is essentially the Crime Syndicate, right? The evil version of the Justice League, more or less. This is supposed to be a 6-issue limited series. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it expanded. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but it's really good. If you guys aren't reading it, you guys should check it out. And let me know down in the comments if you guys actually want me to cover it, because it's really awesome, right? It's not super lengthy, it's pretty quick, and I'm hoping they kind of keep it going, right? I'm afraid they won't because of sales, but I'm hoping they keep it going because it's a great concept. But with that being said, guys, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.